Have you ever wondered why certain doors closed right when you were about to step through them, why certain people walked away without explanation, why opportunities disappeared at the last second, why attacks came out of nowhere, why confusion showed up in seasons where clarity should have been easy, and why the pressure became strongest right before your breakthrough? Because what if I told you those moments were never accidents? What if I told you there was an unseen battle happening around your life that you did not even realize existed? What if I told you the enemy studied your potential and tried everything possible to stop you before you reached what God already prepared for you, but heaven stepped in and said, no, you cannot touch this one, you cannot destroy this purpose, you cannot cancel this destiny, because this life belongs to me. And the moment God speaks that word, no, every force of darkness must step back, every plan formed against you begins to collapse, and every trap designed to capture your future begins to break apart before it ever reaches your path. And the reason you are still standing today, the reason you survived what should have destroyed you, the reason you kept moving forward when everything tried to push you backward, the reason your faith did not die even when your strength almost disappeared, is because God Himself stood between you and what was trying to stop you, and He refused to let the enemy win over your story. There were moments when you thought something was wrong with you because progress slowed down unexpectedly. There were seasons when it felt like everyone else was moving ahead while you remained stuck in the same place, praying the same prayers, believing the same promises, and waiting for something to finally shift. But what you did not realize during those silent seasons was that heaven was actively protecting you from battles you were never meant to fight and dangers you were never supposed to face. Because sometimes delay is not rejection. Sometimes silence is not absence, sometimes closed doors are not punishment, sometimes confusion is not failure, sometimes waiting is actually protection, and sometimes the reason things did not work the way you expected is because the enemy tried to stop what God was building in your life. But God stepped in and said, no, not this one, not now, not ever. You may not have seen the attack, but you felt the pressure. You may not have heard the accusation, but you experienced the resistance. You may not have recognized the strategy, but you lived through the struggle, because spiritual opposition always shows up wherever divine purpose exists, and the greater the assignment on your life, the stronger the resistance becomes, because darkness never fights what has no value. Darkness only fights what carries destiny, and the fact that you faced battles others around you never understood is evidence that your life carries something significant, something powerful, something heaven refuses to lose. And every time the enemy tried to silence your voice, weaken your confidence, confuse your direction, or break your hope, God stepped forward and said, no, this story is not ending here. This purpose is not being canceled. This future is not being stolen. This child of mine is still moving forward. There were nights when discouragement whispered that nothing was changing. There were mornings when motivation disappeared before the day even started. There were moments when fear tried to convince you that maybe you misunderstood what God promised. Maybe you expected too much, maybe you believed too strongly, maybe you trusted too deeply, maybe you hoped too boldly. But what fear never told you was that heaven had already secured your future before the attack ever began, because God never waits until problems appear to create solutions. God prepares protection before opposition arrives. God releases strength before weakness shows up. God positions help before trouble reaches your door. And even when you felt alone, you were never actually alone, because heaven was already working behind the scenes, defending what you could not defend, protecting what you could not protect, and preserving what you did not even realize was under attack. Sometimes the enemy does not try to destroy you all at once. Sometimes he tries to distract you slowly. Sometimes he tries to delay you quietly. Sometimes he tries to confuse you subtly. Sometimes he tries to exhaust you gradually, because he knows if he can make you question your identity, you might hesitate before stepping into your assignment. If he can make you doubt your calling, you might step away from your purpose. If he can make you feel forgotten, you might stop expecting miracles. But what the enemy underestimated is that God does not change his mind about the people he chooses, and he does not cancel the plans he already wrote, and he does not abandon the purpose he already placed inside your spirit. And no matter how strong the resistance became, heaven already decided that your destiny would survive the attack. Think about the situations that should have ended your progress but somehow did not. Think about the relationships that tried to define your limitations but failed. Think about the mistakes that could have destroyed your confidence but instead taught you wisdom. Think about the setbacks that looked permanent but somehow turned temporary. Think about the battles you never thought you would survive but somehow you are still here, still breathing, still believing, still moving forward, and still standing stronger than before. And that is not coincidence, that is protection, that is intervention, that is evidence that when the enemy tried to stop you, God stepped in and said, no, this life still has purpose, this voice still has influence, this future still has promise, and this story is still being written by my hands. There were moments when people misunderstood you, moments when opportunities disappeared, moments when doors closed without explanation, moments when your effort was not recognized, moments when your loyalty was not returned, moments when your prayers felt unanswered, moments when your strength felt insufficient, moments when your direction felt uncertain. But what you could not see during those seasons was that heaven was blocking what would have damaged you, heaven was redirecting what would have distracted you, heaven was removing what would have limited you, and heaven was protecting what the enemy tried to steal before it even reached your hands. Because sometimes God says no to the enemy by saying wait to you. Sometimes God says no to the attack by saying prepare to you. Sometimes God says no to destruction by saying trust me to you. And those moments when nothing made sense were actually moments when everything was being secured. You were never meant to be stopped by what tried to stop you. You were never meant to be defined by what tried to limit you. You were never meant to be broken by what tried to weaken you, because before the enemy ever formed a strategy against your future, God already formed a promise over your life, and promises from heaven cannot be canceled by pressure, cannot be erased by opposition, cannot be destroyed by delay, cannot be weakened by doubt, cannot be stolen by darkness. Because when God says no to the enemy, that decision becomes final, and every attempt to block your progress becomes temporary, no matter how convincing it looked at the time. And the truth is, there were attacks you never even noticed, battles you never saw, dangers you never recognized, opportunities you were protected from losing, mistakes you were protected from making, relationships you were protected from trusting, paths you were protected from walking, because God was guarding your future in ways you did not understand while you were simply trying to survive the present moment. And the reason you are still moving forward today is not because every situation worked in your favor, but because heaven refused to let opposition cancel what was already assigned to your life before you were even aware of it.
There were moments when you thought the silence meant God had stepped away from you, but what you didn't realize is that heaven was not silent, it was strategic, because every delay you experienced was not a denial, it was protection, and every closed door that confused you was actually a shield placed there by God Himself, because the enemy had plans that you never saw, conversations that were happening behind your back, traps that were being prepared in secret, attacks forming in places your eyes could not reach, but God stepped in before they could touch your life and said, no, not this one, not my child, not the one I have chosen, not the one I am preparing for something greater. And that is why things did not work the way you expected, because sometimes the greatest miracle is not what God allows, but what God refuses to allow. And today you are standing here stronger than what tried to break you, wiser than what tried to deceive you, and still moving forward even after everything that tried to stop your progress, because when the enemy studied your weaknesses, God already wrote your victory. When the enemy predicted your failure, God already scheduled your breakthrough. And when the enemy thought your story would end in disappointment, God already declared that your ending would be restoration and purpose and favor that no person could take away from you. You have to understand something powerful right now. The reason the enemy attacked your confidence, your peace, your relationships, your finances, your opportunities, and even your faith was because he saw something in your future that you had not yet seen yourself. He saw the impact you are about to make. He saw the doors that are about to open. He saw the influence you are about to carry, and he knew that if he could stop you early, he could delay what God planned through you. But what the enemy did not expect was that every attack he sent actually pushed you closer to God. Every disappointment forced you to pray deeper. Every betrayal taught you to depend on heaven instead of people, and every delay strengthened a patience inside you that now cannot be shaken, because God was not just protecting your destination, he was developing your spirit, he was building your endurance, he was shaping your faith into something unbreakable. And now you are not the same person you used to be, because the struggle that was meant to destroy you actually prepared you. There were nights when you cried and nobody saw you. There were mornings when you smiled, but your heart still felt heavy. There were moments when you kept going even though you felt like quitting, and those were the exact moments heaven recorded as victories, because faith is not proven when life is easy. Faith is proven when everything around you says stop, but something inside you still says keep walking. And that voice inside you was never your imagination. That voice was God reminding you that you are not alone. That voice was God telling you that your story is still being written. That voice was God declaring over your life that what tried to stop you cannot finish you, because what he started in you cannot be cancelled by fear, cannot be cancelled by delay, cannot be cancelled by rejection, and cannot be cancelled by any attack sent against your purpose. The enemy thought isolation would weaken you, but isolation actually strengthened your connection with God. The enemy thought rejection would make you doubt yourself, but rejection actually redirected you to the place where your purpose could grow. The enemy thought confusion would slow you down, but confusion actually taught you how to listen more carefully to God's voice. And now you are walking with a clarity that cannot be shaken by opinions, cannot be shaken by criticism, and cannot be shaken by fear, because when God says yes over your life, no opposition can reverse it, and no obstacle can rewrite it, and no person can steal it from you. Right now something is shifting around you. Even if you cannot see it yet, doors are aligning. Opportunities are forming, connections are being prepared, and favor is moving in your direction, because God never protects someone without also preparing something for them. And the same God who blocked what was meant to harm you is now opening what is meant to bless you. The same God who stopped the attack is now releasing the answer. The same God who said no to the enemy is now saying yes to your next season, and this next season will not look like your last season, because what is coming is restoration for what you lost, strength for what you survived, peace for what tried to disturb you, and opportunities that match the level of faith you carried through the storm. So if you are still standing today, if you are still believing today, if you are still moving forward even after everything that tried to stop you, then understand something powerful. This is proof that God already said no to the enemy on your behalf, and if he already protected you through what you survived, then imagine what he is preparing you for next, because the battle that almost broke you was actually the beginning of the testimony that is about to build you. And what tried to stop you will soon become the reason people look at your life and see the evidence that when God says no to the enemy, no force on earth can change his decision.
There was a moment in your life when everything around you looked like it was collapsing at the same time, and you thought maybe this was the chapter where your story quietly faded into the background. But what you didn't realize in that painful silence was that heaven had already stepped into your situation before the enemy even finished planning his attack, because every delay you experienced was not rejection, it was protection. Every Closed door was not punishment, it was redirection, and every tear you cried in private became evidence that God was fighting a battle on your behalf that you were never meant to fight alone, and that is why the enemy tried so hard to make you feel forgotten, because he knew if you ever discovered what God was actually preparing behind the scenes, you would stop doubting and start walking with authority again. You would stop apologizing for surviving and start thanking God for sustaining you. You would stop asking, "Why this happened to me?" and start declaring, "This happened for me," because there is something powerful about a person who realizes they were supposed to fall but didn't, they were supposed to break but didn't, they were supposed to quit but somehow kept going even when nobody else understood how they were still standing. And the truth is, the enemy didn't expect you to still be here right now reading these words, breathing this moment, and holding on to even a small amount of faith, but God said no. When the enemy tried to silence your voice, God said no. When the enemy tried to destroy your confidence, God said no. When the enemy tried to convince you that your future had already been decided by your past, because what the enemy meant as a stopping point, God transformed into a turning point. And that is why something inside your spirit kept whispering, "Don't give up yet," even when your strength was gone, even when the support disappeared, even when the answers never arrived on time, because heaven was sending you a message that your story is not ending here. Your calling is not cancelled, your purpose is not broken, and your destiny has not been delayed beyond repair. You are still being positioned for something greater than what tried to defeat you, and that is exactly why the pressure increased before your breakthrough, because pressure always shows up right before purpose begins to rise, and the enemy only fights hardest against the people he fears most, which means the very resistance you experienced was proof that something powerful was growing inside your life that could not be stopped by disappointment, could not be erased by betrayal, and could not be destroyed by delay. And even now, while you are still trying to understand why certain things happened the way they did, God is quietly arranging moments, opportunities, connections, and restorations that will make sense of everything you survived, because what looked like loss was actually preparation, what looked like isolation was actually protection, and what looked like the end was actually the place where God whispered, "This is where I begin again with you." And the reason you are still standing today is not because the battle was easy, but because God refused to let the enemy write the final sentence of your story. And what is coming next in your life will not only restore what tried to break you, but it will reveal why the enemy tried so hard to stop you in the first place, because your survival was never an accident. It was a decision made in heaven long before the enemy ever tried to interfere with your path, and that decision is still protecting you right now, even in ways you cannot yet see. There was a moment when you almost believed the silence meant defeat, and there was a night when the pressure became so heavy that your heart whispered, "Maybe this is where my story ends." But what you did not realize in that moment was heaven had already spoken a sentence over your life that no darkness could rewrite, because when the enemy tried to close doors around you, God was not confused, God was not delayed, God was not reacting, God was already moving pieces into position that your natural eyes could not see. And while you thought something was ending, God was actually protecting something that the enemy was terrified you would eventually step into, because there are assignments on your life that cannot be cancelled by fear, cannot be erased by delay, and cannot be destroyed by opposition. And that is why the resistance increased the moment you started getting closer to your purpose, because hell only attacks what heaven has already approved. And what you are feeling right now is not random. Pressure, it is confirmation that something valuable is attached to your next step, and the enemy tried everything he could to distract you, discourage you, and disconnect you from what God promised. But the reason you are still standing today is because every time the enemy said stop, God said continue. Every time the enemy said delay, God said prepare. Every time the enemy said quit, God said trust me a little longer, because what is ahead of you is not ordinary restoration, it is supernatural positioning. And there are people who walked away from you thinking they were rejecting you, but they were actually removing themselves from the season God was preparing for you. And there were opportunities that disappeared without explanation, not because you failed, but because God refused to allow you to settle for something smaller than what He already planned for your future. And sometimes protection feels like loss until you reach the place where you finally understand why God said no to what you were begging Him to allow, because what God is protecting in your life right now is bigger than what you lost and stronger than what tried to replace it. And there are spiritual battles that ended before they ever reached you, because God blocked them before they touched your destiny. And there are attacks that never reached your family because God stood between you and the assignment of the enemy. And even though you felt weak, heaven never stopped fighting for you, because your name has been spoken in rooms you have never entered yet, and your story is being arranged in ways you cannot yet recognize. And the enemy tried to convince you that the waiting season meant abandonment, but waiting in God's timing is not punishment. Waiting is preparation. And while you were praying, God was aligning. While you were crying, God was correcting. While you were confused, God was connecting things behind the scenes that are about to make sense all at once. And suddenly the doors that refused to open before are going to open faster than you expected, and the answers you were searching for are going to appear in moments that feel perfectly timed, because God does not forget what He promised, and He does not ignore what He started in your life, and He does not abandon what He personally designed. And even when the enemy tried to surround your future with obstacles, God surrounded your life with protection. And even when fear tried to speak louder than faith, God continued whispering promises into your spirit that refused to disappear. And that whisper inside you telling you not to quit is not your imagination. That whisper is evidence that heaven is still speaking over your life. And the reason you survived what should have broken you is because your assignment is still active, your purpose is still protected, and your breakthrough is still scheduled. And what the enemy tried to cancel, God has already confirmed, and what the enemy tried to delay, God has already secured, and what the enemy tried to steal, God has already replaced with something greater than what you lost. Because when God says no weapon formed against you shall prosper, it means the attack may form, but it cannot finish what it started. And right now there is a shift happening around your life that you cannot fully see yet, but you can feel it in your spirit, because something is changing, something is aligning, something is opening. And the same God who carried you through the hidden battles is now preparing to reveal the visible victory that proves once and for all that when the enemy tried to stop you, God already said no before the attack even began. There is something powerful happening in your life right now that the enemy never expected you to survive, because the season you just walked through was not supposed to strengthen you, it was supposed to silence you. It was not supposed to build your faith. It was supposed to break your confidence. It was not supposed to prepare your future. It was supposed to bury your purpose. But what the enemy did not understand is that when God places His hand on someone's life, even their pain becomes preparation, and even their delays become direction, and even their rejection becomes protection. And that means every closed door you cried about was actually a door God locked on purpose, because what is ahead of you cannot be entered carrying the weight of what tried to destroy you behind you. And that is why you are still standing today, even after nights when you thought your strength was gone. Even after moments when you questioned if God was still listening, even after seasons when nothing around you made sense, because heaven never stopped working on your behalf even when you could not see a single sign of progress. What you are walking into now is not random timing, it is divine alignment, and the reason the pressure increased before this season is because something bigger than your struggle is about to be released over your life, something that required your faith to mature before it arrived, something that required your heart to heal before it could be trusted to carry the blessing, something that required your spirit to become stronger than your fear so that when the opportunity finally shows up you will not run from it but step into it with confidence, knowing that God Himself prepared the path in front of you. And this is the moment where many people give up too early because they mistake silence for absence, when in reality silence is often the sound of heaven arranging details you are not supposed to control. There were battles you never saw that God already won for you, conversations that happened about you that God already redirected, traps that were placed in your path that God already removed before you even stepped close enough to be harmed. And if God allowed you to see how many times He protected you without your awareness, you would realize that your survival was never luck and your strength was never coincidence. It was purpose. It was assignment. It was divine covering from the very beginning. And that means what is coming next in your life is not something the enemy can stop, because it was not created by the enemy and it will not be controlled by the enemy. It was created by God Himself, and what God begins nobody can cancel. Folded hands. There is a shift happening inside you right now that is preparing you for the next level of your calling, because the version of you that started this journey is not the version of you that will finish it. The pain changed you, the waiting strengthened you, the silence matured you, and the disappointment taught you how to depend on God instead of depending on people who could not carry your destiny anyway. And now that your foundation is stronger, your future can finally become larger, because God never expands someone's territory before expanding their capacity to handle what they prayed for. You may not realize it yet, but what felt like isolation was actually preparation, what felt like delay was actually positioning, and what felt like loss was actually separation from things that were never meant to walk into your next season with you. Because sometimes before God elevates someone, He quietly removes voices that would have confused them, and relationships that would have limited them, and environments that would have distracted them, not because He wants them to feel alone, but because He is preparing them to walk somewhere that requires focus, clarity, and courage that cannot grow in crowded places. Sparkles. This is why you cannot measure your progress by what you see around you right now, because the most important work God is doing in your life is happening inside you before it ever becomes visible around you. And just like a seed grows underground before anyone sees the first sign of life, your breakthrough has been growing in hidden places long before this moment arrived. Which means what looks slow to people around you is actually precise timing in the hands of God, and when the right moment comes, everything that looked delayed will suddenly make sense at once. God did not bring you this far just to leave you in confusion. He did not protect you through those storms just to abandon you before your promise, and He did not carry you through those nights of uncertainty just to stop walking with you when your future finally started opening in front of you. Because when God begins something in someone's life, He finishes what He started, and He completes what He promised, and He restores what was lost in ways that prove His timing is always greater than human expectation. So if your faith feels tired right now, do not mistake tired faith for weak faith, because tired faith is still faith that kept walking even when it did not understand the road ahead, and God honors the kind of faith that keeps moving forward even when it cannot see the destination yet, because that kind of faith shows heaven that you trust the one who leads you more than you trust the circumstances around you. And that trust is exactly what opens doors nobody else can open and creates opportunities nobody else can block. There is something powerful happening right now that most people around you cannot see and cannot understand, because while they are judging your silence, God is preparing your voice; while they are questioning your delay, God is arranging your timing; while they are watching your struggle, God is building your strength in places they will never be able to reach. And the reason this season has felt heavier than anything you expected is because heaven is trusting you with a transformation that requires endurance before elevation and patience before promotion and surrender before breakthrough. And even though there were nights when you questioned whether anything was changing and mornings when you woke up carrying the same pressure you went to sleep with, the truth is that something invisible has been shifting around your life every single day, even when nothing looked different on the outside, because God never wastes a silent season and He never allows a waiting season to exist without purpose, and He never allows a storm to surround someone He is preparing for something greater than what they have survived before. And what you are standing inside right now is not a delay, it is a divine alignment that is positioning you for something that requires a stronger version of you than the one who first started this journey. And that is why some doors closed without explanation, and some relationships ended without warning, and some opportunities disappeared without clarity, because God knew they were connected to a version of your life that could not go where He is taking you next. And even though it hurt to let go of what felt familiar, He was protecting what He already planned for your future. And sometimes protection feels like loss before it feels like purpose, and sometimes preparation feels like isolation before it feels like elevation, and sometimes obedience feels like silence before it becomes impact. But what you need to understand right now is that nothing you walked away from in obedience was wasted, and nothing you released in faith was forgotten, and nothing you surrendered in trust was ignored, because heaven keeps record of sacrifices people never noticed, and heaven responds to prayers nobody else heard, and heaven moves in moments when your strength looked small but your faith stayed standing anyway. And there is something about the way you kept trusting when the answers did not come that activated movement in places you could not see, and there is something about the way you kept believing when the results did not appear that opened doors you did not know existed, and there is something about the way you kept praying even when your heart felt tired that shifted timelines around your destiny in ways you will soon begin to recognize, because God is not preparing something ordinary for someone who stayed faithful in an extraordinary storm, and He is not arranging something temporary for someone who trusted Him through a permanent kind of uncertainty, and He is not opening something small for someone who carried a heavy season without losing their hope. And the reason the pressure increased before this moment is because pressure always rises before purpose reveals itself, and the reason confusion surrounded you before clarity arrived is because confusion often exists right before direction becomes undeniable, and the reason opposition tried to discourage you before this breakthrough season is because opposition always recognizes movement before people do, and What the enemy hoped would exhaust you actually strengthened you, and what was meant to distract you actually redirected you, and what was supposed to delay you actually aligned you with something heaven had already scheduled for this exact time in your life. And that is why you cannot measure your progress by what you see today, because some of the greatest changes happening for you right now are invisible until the moment God decides it is time for them to become undeniable. And when that moment arrives, people who doubted your process will witness your transformation, and people who misunderstood your silence will recognize your authority, and people who questioned your patience will see your promotion, and they will not understand how everything changed so quickly. But what they will not realize is that God was working slowly and intentionally long before the results became visible, and long before the doors opened, and long before the answers appeared. He was already arranging details in your favor and positioning people in your path, and removing obstacles from your future, and protecting opportunities that were designed specifically for your calling. And there is something important you must remember right now, because this next step of your journey is closer than it looks, and clearer than it feels, and stronger than the fear that tried to stop you from believing again. And that truth is this: God never brings someone this far just to leave them standing at the edge of uncertainty without purpose, and He never allows someone to survive this much just to stop before the moment their breakthrough begins to appear. And He never allows someone to keep trusting this long unless something greater than what they lost is already being prepared ahead of them. And what is coming into your life next will not require you to chase it, because what God prepares for you recognizes you when the time is right, and what God assigns to you finds you when the season is ready. And what God promises to you arrives when your spirit is strong enough to carry it without fear. And the reason your strength has been growing quietly is because your next assignment requires confidence that does not depend on approval, and faith that does not depend on evidence, and courage that does not depend on comfort. And that kind of strength only develops in seasons like the one you just survived. And that is why this chapter is different from the last one, because this time you are not walking forward the same way you did before. This time you are stepping into something that was prepared while you were praying, something that was protected while you were waiting, and something that was positioned while you were trusting, even when nothing around you seemed to be changing at all. And very soon you are going to recognize that this entire season was never about what you were losing, it was always about who you were becoming.